In the small village of Kando, nestled in the rolling hills of rural Ghana, a young boy named Kofi struggled to survive. Orphaned at the age of 6, Kofi had grown up on the streets, relying on the charity of neighbors and the scraps from the local market to get by. With no family to care for him, Kofi had learned to fend for himself, scavenging for food and shelter in a community where resources were scarce. Despite his tough exterior, Kofi had a kind heart and a deep longing for connection and belonging. As he navigated the challenges of village life, Kofi faced numerous obstacles, from hostile villagers who saw him as a burden, to the ever-present threat of hunger and illness. Yet, despite these hardships, Kofi held on to hope, fueled by his determination to create a better life for himself. In this small village, where everyone knew each other's business, Kofi's story was no secret. But what the villagers didn't know was that Kofi's life was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and his place in the world. As Kofi navigated the challenges of village life, he faced numerous obstacles that threatened to derail his dreams of a better future. As an orphan, Kofi was forced to rely on the charity of others to survive. He would often go to bed with an empty stomach, his belly aching with hunger. He would scrounge through the local market, searching for scraps to eat, but often came up empty-handed. Despite his desire to learn, Kofi's lack of education was a significant barrier to his success. Without parents to advocate for him, Kofi was unable to attend school, and his illiteracy made it difficult for him to find work or access basic services. He would watch as his peers attended school, their backpacks full of books and their faces full of excitement, and feel a deep sense of longing. But it wasn't just poverty and lack of education that Kofi faced. As an orphan, he was also subject to social stigma and discrimination. Many of the villagers viewed him as a burden, a reminder of the poverty and hardship that they themselves struggled to overcome. They would whisper behind his back, calling him Akatasu, a derogatory term for an orphan. The shame and humiliation that Kofi felt was overwhelming, and he often wondered if he would ever be able to escape the circumstances of his birth. Despite these challenges, Kofi refused to give up. He held on to the hope that one day, he would be able to create a better life for himself, a life free from poverty, hunger, and shame. He would often look up at the stars, feeling a sense of wonder and awe at the vastness of the universe, and dream of a future where he was more than just an orphan, where he was a son, a brother, a friend, and a valued member of his community. But for now, Kofi's reality was far from that dream. He was forced to confront the harsh realities of his life, and to find ways to survive in a world that seemed determined to hold him back. As Kofi navigated the challenges of village life, he faced numerous obstacles that threatened to derail his dreams of a better future. As an orphan, Kofi was forced to rely on the charity of others to survive, but even that was scarce. But Kofi's struggles didn't end there. A few days later, a fierce storm swept through the village, destroying Kofi's shelter and leaving him homeless. He was forced to seek refuge in a nearby abandoned building, where he huddled in the corner, shivering with fear and cold. As the days turned into weeks, Kofi's life became increasingly desperate. He was forced to beg for food, often going hungry for days on end. His body began to weaken, his skin growing pale and gaunt. He became a shadow of his former self, a mere specter of the bright and curious boy he once was. Despite his best efforts, Kofi couldn't shake off the feeling of hopelessness that had settled over him. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of despair, with no lifeline in sight. As he lay in the abandoned building, surrounded by the cold and darkness, Kofi wondered if he would ever find a way out of the abyss that had become his life. The villagers, who had once shown him kindness and compassion, now seemed to have given up on him. They would pass him by on the street, averting their eyes as if he was a ghost. Kofi felt like he was invisible, a non-person who didn't deserve to be seen or heard. As the months dragged on, Kofi's body began to give up. He contracted illnesses that he couldn't shake off, his immune system weakened by malnutrition and neglect. He became a mere skeleton of his former self, a haunting reminder of the devastating consequences of poverty and neglect. And yet, despite all this, Kofi refused to give up. He held on to the hope that one day, he would be able to escape the hellhole that had become his life. He would dream of a future where he was loved, cared for, and valued as a human being. But for now, he was trapped in a living nightmare, with no end in sight. Kofi's daily life was a constant struggle to survive. He would wake up before dawn, his stomach growling with hunger, and set out to scrounge for food. He would rummage through the market, searching for scraps that vendors would throw away. He would often go hungry, but he never gave up. As he walked through the village, Kofi would encounter the same familiar faces every day. There was Amma, the kind-hearted market vendor, who would sometimes slip him a piece of fruit or a handful of peanuts. There was also Kwame, the village elder, who would often lecture Kofi about the importance of education and hard work. But most of the villagers would ignore Kofi, or worse, shout at him to get out of their way. Despite the cold reception, Kofi held on to his dreams. He would often sit by the river, watching the fish swim in the water, and imagine a different life for himself. He would dream of going to school, of learning to read and write, of becoming a doctor or a teacher. He would imagine having a family of his own, a wife and children who loved and cared for him. But Kofi's dreams were constantly thwarted by the harsh realities of his life. He would try to attend school, but the teacher would chase him away, saying that he was too poor and too dirty to learn. He would try to find work, but no one would hire him, saying that he was too young and too weak. Kofi's only solace was his friendship with a stray dog that he had named Akua. Akua was a scrappy little terrier who had been abandoned by her owners. Kofi and Akua would spend hours together, exploring the village and the surrounding countryside. Akua would sit by Kofi's side as he ate his meager meals, and she would lick his face when he cried. Despite the difficulties of his life, Kofi never lost hope. He would often look up at the stars and wonder what lay beyond the horizon. He would dream of a better life, a life where he was loved and cared for, and where he could achieve his dreams. One day, as Kofi was walking through the village, he stumbled upon a small, dusty library. The library was run by a kind-hearted old man named Mr. Owusu, who had a passion for books and learning. Kofi was immediately drawn to the library, and he spent hours browsing through the shelves, devouring books on every subject imaginable. Mr. Owusu took a liking to Kofi and began to mentor him, teaching him how to read and write, and introducing him to the world of literature and learning. For the first time in his life, Kofi felt like he had found a place where he belonged, a place where he could escape the hardships of his life and explore his dreams. But even as Kofi found solace in the library, he knew that his life was far from easy. He still had to face the challenges of poverty and neglect, and he still had to deal with the cruelty and indifference of the villagers. Yet, with Mr. Owusu's guidance and support, Kofi began to feel a sense of hope and purpose that he had never felt before. He began to realize that, no matter how difficult his life was, he had the power to create his own destiny, and to achieve his dreams. One day, as Kofi was walking through the village, he stumbled upon a group of strangers who had arrived in the village. They were a team of aid workers from a non-governmental organization, NGO, that focused on providing education and healthcare to underprivileged children. As Kofi watched from a distance, the aid workers began to set up a makeshift clinic in the village square. They were providing free medical checkups and vaccinations to the village children. Kofi's curiosity got the better of him, and he slowly made his way towards the clinic. As he approached, one of the aid workers, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Emma, noticed him. Dr. Emma smiled warmly at Kofi and asked him if he wanted to receive a medical checkup. Kofi hesitated at first, but Dr. Emma's gentle manner put him at ease. As Dr. Emma examined Kofi, she discovered that he was suffering from a range of health problems, including malnutrition, malaria, and a severe case of intestinal worms. She immediately began to administer treatment and provided Kofi with medication and nutritional supplements. But Dr. Emma's kindness didn't stop there. As she talked to Kofi, she realized that he was an exceptionally bright and curious boy who had been denied the opportunity to attend school. She decided to take matters into her own hands and offered to sponsor Kofi's education. For Kofi, this was a turning point in his life. Dr. Emma's act of kindness opened up a world of possibilities for him. He began to attend school, where he excelled academically and discovered a passion for learning. With Dr. Emma's support, Kofi's life began to transform in ways he never thought possible. He started to see himself in a new light, as a capable and deserving individual who had the potential to make a positive impact in the world. As Kofi looked back on his life, he realized that Dr. Emma's act of kindness had been the catalyst for change. It had given him the courage to dream big and the confidence to pursue his goals. And for that, Kofi would be forever grateful. As Kofi settled into his new life as a student, he began to flourish. He excelled in his studies, particularly in mathematics and science, and his teachers took notice of his exceptional abilities. Dr. Emma continued to support Kofi, providing him with books, uniforms, and other essential supplies. She also visited him regularly, offering guidance and encouragement as he navigated the challenges of school. But Kofi's success wasn't limited to the classroom. He also began to form meaningful relationships with his classmates and teachers. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged, like he was part of a community that cared about him. As Kofi's confidence grew, so did his ambitions. He began to dream of attending university, of becoming a doctor or engineer, of making a real difference in the world. But despite his progress, Kofi never forgot his humble beginnings. He remained humble and kind, always willing to lend a helping hand to those in need. One day, as Kofi was walking home from school, he came across a young boy who was rummaging through a trash can, searching for food. Kofi immediately recognized the desperation in the boy's eyes, and his heart went out to him. Without hesitation, Kofi approached the boy and offered him a piece of bread from his lunch. The boy gratefully accepted, and Kofi sat down beside him, listening as he shared his story. As they talked, Kofi realized that the boy's situation was eerily familiar. He had been in those same shoes just a few years ago, struggling to survive on the streets. In that moment, Kofi knew that he had to do something to help. He couldn't just sit back and watch as another child suffered the same fate he had endured. With newfound determination, Kofi began to formulate a plan. He would find a way to help this boy, and others like him, to escape the cycle of poverty and desperation. Little did Kofi know, this chance encounter would set him on a path that would change the course of his life forever. As Kofi sat with the young boy, listening to his story and sharing his own experiences, he felt a sense of purpose wash over him. He realized that he had been given a second chance at life, and that it was his responsibility to help others who were struggling. With newfound determination, Kofi began to work tirelessly to help the young boy and others like him. He used his own experiences to inform his work, and he quickly became a leader in his community. Years went by, and Kofi's efforts began to bear fruit. He established a network of community programs, including food banks, schools, and healthcare clinics. He also founded a scholarship program, which provided opportunities for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to pursue their dreams. As Kofi looked out over the community he had helped to build, he felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. He had come a long way from the hungry, desperate boy he once was, and he knew that he had made a real difference in the lives of others. Dr. Emma, the aid worker who had changed Kofi's life, smiled as she looked at the man he had become. "You have exceeded all of my expectations, Kofi," she said. "You are a true leader, and your community is lucky to have you." Kofi smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude and humility. He knew that he had been given a rare gift, and he was determined to use it to make the world a better place. And so, Kofi's story comes full circle. From a life of poverty and desperation to one of purpose and fulfillment, Kofi's journey is a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome adversity and achieve greatness.